Okay, just doing a bit of housekeeping on the old stream settings. Bear with me a second. Right, here we go. Okay, so the uh, the approved bids for Chelsea, I believe, have come in this afternoon. So I'll start with the Chelsea story. Now, there's a list of approved bids, and these the bids that have been put forward. They've been approved by the FA and the Premier League under the Special Operations License. Now, the time frame is ticking, uh, and so let's have a quick look at the news. Let's have a look at, so the approved bid list is there. Chelsea. Right, let's have a look. So obviously, the shortlist is to be cut to three preferred bidders. Let's see, this is what Reuters were reporting yesterday. So the Chelsea bidder shortlist to be cut to three. The Candy bid has been increased. Um, okay, let's have a quick look. Aha, Chelsea bidder shortlist. Right. Um, let's have a look. There's a couple of preferred buyers. Uh, they've got to pass the director's test. Okay, there's the Candy bids, and there's the Chicago Cubs owners, the Ricketts family, and Martin Broughton and World Athletics president Sebastian Coe. So they're the three main bids on the table. Some bids being made public now. Centricus confirmed that they've also offered to come in. There is the Saudi media headed by Mohammed can't remember, Al Kaher Reggie. So there's about five or six that are currently on the table. That shortlist is to be reduced to three in the coming days. So the special operations license for Chelsea runs until the 31st of May. They want to wind up this bidding process and the final purchase as quickly as possible. Obviously, the playing and non-playing staff need job security and job certainty. Should no bid pass the fit and proper persons or the director's test and not meet government approval by that date, the likelihood is that the club will go into administration, and then the administrators take over, which ultimately leads to points deductions, and should no buyer be found within a time frame, liquidation is the result. Now, I don't think that happens. I think we're more likely to have a buyer put in place. I don't think the club goes down like a Derby County route as we're seeing right now, or a Bury FC, or a Macclesfield Town, and go out of business completely. But there may be a period of administration as, I would say, medium case scenario, not the worst, not the best. Best case scenario is one of the three favoured bids that make the shortlist is approved and the process is quick. So the Candy Consortium, this business developer who is a Chelsea fan, which I think may actually help his case. I think his bid is the one that actually is approved. He's a local businessman. He is worth a substantial amount of cash. So we'll see. Jason Roy, I noticed when I was looking at the Chelsea news and trying to find news on the Chelsea situation that he had been disciplined and he had been suspended. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at sport quickly. So let's have a quick look. Let's see what the news are actually saying. Match fixing. That is a very very. Let's have a look. He had a hearing. So let's have a look. This is England battered Jason Roy given suspended 2-match ban and a fine. He's been so conducting himself in a manner which may be prejudicial to the interests of cricket or may bring the game into disrepute. Um, I would have thought something has obviously happened. Now, if there was any kind of match fixing, he'll be suspended indefinitely. Um, that's my feeling on how suspensions of that nature, any kind of criminal activity, um, with a pending trial date, you're normally stood down indefinitely until legal proceedings have concluded. Look at Mason Greenwood. Now, his offence is far more serious, but he's been indefinitely suspended by his club, and he's not allowed to attend any kind of club activities. That doesn't mean he's not getting paid. Um, I would think that the problem is if there is an attempt at cover up, that makes the situation worse. Um, Now we don't know what he's done. He might have breached team curfew for all we know, because he's got a suspended suspension, if that makes sense, for 12 months. So I would assume it's more of a conduct whilst on England duty. Um, Now there could be a number of reasons with it, because every sport will have a code of conduct. What is acceptable and what isn't acceptable when you are representing your club or your country. Every workplace has that. Um, but from what I've seen with match fixing, I mean, Srisanth, Indian fast bowler, he's in prison for 10 years. He went to prison for 10 years. Um, so, and India is rife with cricket match fixing allegations. The ICC come down quite reactionary, but quite hard. They will issue lengthy bans. And when we saw the Pakistani trio go to court, one get a suspended sentence and two go to prison, I would think I would think that this is not to do with let's say match fixing, but more to do with breaching curfew or breaching team discipline rules. And it could be his first offence at breaching a code of conduct rule. Um, Now, the fact that they're not being clear on what is going on, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a drugs offence. The three strike policy. He's clearly not injured. He's never had any disciplinary issues off the field before. Um, and for me, that sounds more like an addiction kind of issue, where it's a three strike policy that a lot of sports have when it comes to recreational drug and alcohol use that affects performance or has led to other disciplinary issues where the testers haven't necessarily caught him, but he has been caught in a compromising position in regards to possession of a controlled recreational substance or failure to turn up to training in a timely manner. Um, Many reasons. There could be many reasons. We don't know what they are. Now, the fact that the ECB aren't coming open on that would say to me that this is probably some kind of addiction issue, um, or some kind of offence of that nature. Now, the thing is, why make a press release saying he has been disciplined and suspended with that suspension suspended? So basically, he's been given a two-match ban, which is suspended for 12 months pending further, behaviour. Um, that is a really bizarre press release to leak to the media. They could say he's you know been dropped for form issues or there's a family personal matter. That's all they had to say. But they've just said that he's taking an indefinite leave. It could be a gambling offence. They may say when you're on England duty, no gambling, even on other sports, because of the links with match fixing. And it could be some kind of addiction issue. Um, The thing, it's a complicated one. Normally, it'll be very, very hush hush in that regard. But we know there's been rumours circulating of players under investigation uh, for either being approached to fix or have attempted to fix um, in the last 4 or 5 years. I think I did a video on it as well. Uh, there was an Australian and two English players under suspicion of, but their names weren't released at the time. Um, it's a very odd press release by the ECB to give. Um, they could say it's been an internal disciplinary matter. He's breached a part of the code of conduct. We're not making any further statements at this time. Um, he will be stood down um, for a period of time, and the fact that they've released he's taking an indefinite leave is a bit surprising. Um, Now, not taking a run when there's an option that you're clearly going to make your ground, and it's an easy single. I've seen easy singles turned down in test matches where you're thinking just keep the strike rolling over, but that could be tactical. That could actually be a thing saying, okay, just figure out the line and length of the bowler and figure out how reactionary the fielding setup is, because you might want that fielder to move to where you've just played the easy single, so that you can actually get a good cover drive through. For example, there is some tactical batting when you're trying to, like, the bowler obviously is bowled a dot ball, but there is a circumstances where you do turn down a single or a second run. There are circumstances, and a lot of it is actually tactical, where you actually want the opposition captain, or if the vice captain's taking over, or the bowler, to adjust his field settings so that fielder moves maybe 5 paces to the right or the left, because you see you knock a few dot balls in that area, and then you just do a nice cover drive where that guy's been standing 3, 4 balls later or the next over. Um, something's definitely happened now. Whether it's to do with, I would say it's probably substance abuse. But whether it's prescription medication or alcohol or recreationals, because if and we've seen this a lot with a lot of players and a lot of sports recently is they've been having issues with addiction, and it's to do with the pressure and the stress of the situation they are under. And what I've noticed, a lot of players when we've had these bubble situations have come and said, look, we are having issues with our mental health, being separated from our relatives, locked up in hotels and in sort of semi-quarantine status where we have to literally go to training, come home, go to the match, come home, back basically. The NRL and AFL had this problem, and then when teams had either not qualified for the finals or been knocked out, players were caught doing silly things, um, and so there is a concern about player mental welfare, and that was raised last season in the NRL and AFL because I follow those leagues obviously, and there's been concerns about that kind of the bubble kind of situation in regards to where the sporting events where there's no fans present, you have to go through these strict quarantine requirements or entry requirements. You were literally your day or your life was bang bang. You wake up in your hotel or base camp, you go to training, you go back to base camp or the hotel or the resort, and that's it. You are not allowed to come into contact with people on the outside world apart from the resort, kind of the bubble staff, the staff that have been vetted to come in while you're staying there. They have to live there as well, by the way. And then you get taken to your match and then back into your bubble situation. And if that's a league thing, maybe like the IPL, you were stuck there for weeks, months at a time. That has been noted by a lot of players, like the NHL last season when they played in the bubble, and the 4 separate divisions with no interdivisional interconference play um, last season. A lot of players, when the Canadian government over this winter brought back in the restrictions of no crowds, strict quarantine, you had to be double vaccinated to cross the border, all this kind of stuff. a lot of players were like, "We don't like playing in these empty arenas. We don't like playing in Canada." So when it came to trade rumours or no trade lists, a lot of Canadian teams were put on the no trade list. So players were saying the bubble dynamic really took it out of them over the last season and a half, and they were very critical, and a lot of them were very openly critical, going, "We do not want to play games in Canada. We don't want to be traded or play for a team, signed to a team that plays out of Canada with no crowds present, strict quarantine restrictions." It's weird. I would think there's definitely been some kind of personal issue that has impacted the code of conduct that the ECB's put in place. Every sporting body has a code of conduct. Now, whether it's as rigidly enforced as it should be or as public knowledge as it should be is another thing. Now, the fact he's been indefinitely stood down, even though his suspension is suspended, so he's not actually suspended from 2 games. He has to just behave himself for the next 12 months. Is a bit surprising that he's taken an indefinite leave, but I would think it is a high likelihood he has been abusing prescription medication, failure to turn up to training in a timely manner, for example. We even have to look at his interviews, maybe. He might have said something in an interview where he's criticised the ECB or the coaching setup, bearing in mind the Ashes series was an absolute unmitigated disaster. And the first 2 tests against the West Indies, we've thrown away from winning positions to have draws. He may have said something, maybe on interview, or even behind the scenes with the coaching setup, the ECB representatives out at the West Indies or at the Ashes in Australia. He may have, you know, had a disagreement with upper management. And that's something people don't realise. There may have been actually an incident involving um, uh, more non-playing staff management kind of things. Something may have happened. There may have been a report of whatever by a teammate or a member of non-playing staff. So we don't know. And the fact that the ECB have been very, very shady about this could say, look, there's a personal issue, whatever. He's been indefinitely stood down for personal reasons. They don't have to mention a ban. I think because a ban's been brought in under ICC rules, they have to mention he is on a suspension pending further issues. I think they have to mention that, but they could have been a bit more transparent with what is going on, because now there's going to be a lot more questions surrounding Alex Hales. He's going to get bombarded on social media. Now, Alex Hales himself has not released his own personal press release through his county cricket club or his agent or his representatives or even himself personally with his family. Um, so it there's definitely something that's going. He might have been caught with a prostitute. That's how silly it may sound. He might have been caught with a non a female member of staff, maybe anything like that. Could be a bit of, there's a bit of that could be a thing. He could have breached team curfew multiple times, failure to turn up to training on time. They normally resulted in a couple of docks. If that's in at club level, that's 2 weeks docked pay, for example. Um, So there could be a multitude of reasons why he has copped his punishment and been, sanctioned by the ECB, and I think that would be definitely under ICC guidelines as well. Um, my thoughts on the Premier League title race and Pochettino's future at PSG. That's a very interesting question. I don't see Pochettino lasting at PSG. Um, If it was criminal, I think that'd be an indefinite suspension whilst the investigation with let's say Ben Stokes, he was basically stood down indefinitely until his trial date. So if there was anything of a severe criminal nature, bear in mind he might have been caught drink driving, um, and if he pleads guilty, you don't necessarily get jail time. You just get a driving ban. You can get jail time if you've had multiple offences. It could be caught speeding. We don't know what it is, and that's the problem. Until Roy himself fronts the media and says what's going on, there's going to be speculation that we're having, which is dangerous because we are now speculating. But normally, when there is suspensions of this nature, it's generally to do with something that's happened on the training field, or a failure to report the training, breach of curfew, a breach of team code of conduct. failure to attend press conferences in a timely manner, various things that are expected under your contract to do. Um, or he may have been caught in a compromising situation, which may have not resulted in any kind of criminal investigation, but could, in some jurisdictions, could be. Now, again, speculation is dangerous. I don't like doing it in matters such as this until more transparency. There's got to be a bit more transparency with the system. I would hazard a guess that it's something to do with a team code of conduct. There may have been a clash between himself and ECB management. Uh, and of course, if you're a centrally contracted player, got to be a bit careful there. Um, there could be a whole multitude of reasons. Um, but he is a senior player in the game, in the England setup, which is worrying. Um, there could have been an issue that's occurred while he's been on T20 duty in one of the various T20 leagues. Um, there could be any multitude of things that are occurring. So again, speculation is dangerous. I am surprised that Jason Roy hasn't released his own press statement. I'm also surprised by the vagueness and the lack of transparency by the ECB, considering they have just basically disciplined a player who's on a centralised contract, and they're not saying the reasons why, but that disciplinary action is suspended for 12 months. So that says to me that within the next, unless they backdated the suspension, we don't know when the alleged incident that has led to this. If it was match fixing, I think that gets referred to the authorities because that is classed as fraud, and then there'll be a police investigation. There's nothing in that is leading towards a police investigation, and the ECB will be pretty stupid to cover it up because then that's perjury, which is also a criminal offence, and obstruction of justice, which is a criminal offence. So it makes it worse. I wouldn't say match fixing is actually a crime. It's fraud. Um, and it's classed as one of the fraud offences. We would know if there was the media would have gone nuts. Um, no, no, there has been an English player convicted of match fixing, and he served 5 years in prison. So he was a young player playing for Essex, and he did serve some prison time, and he did make big headlines. I can't remember who it was. He hadn't played for the England setup, but he was an Essex player, and he took bribes. He was a fast bowler. He took bribes to bowl no balls and wides and leg buys and basically bowl extras. Basically, um, is Eddie Jones a dead man walking? It's a 50-50 on that one. If the RFU do decide to terminate his contract, they've got to pay him out, which is they're trying to avoid that with all the financial losses that rugby union has suffered in the last 2 years. As of tomorrow, it's 2 years since the UK's first lockdown. And so they would want to avoid that kind of situation because that is a financial hit they don't want. And also, I think he should have been sacked maybe a year or two ago. I think we're too close to a World Cup. I honestly believe if it was match fixing allegations, the police would have it would have already made bigger headlines. Personally, with some of that would have made bigger headlines. We would have seen the media would have gone, "Oh, there's police turning up and a player has been led away in cuffs." There's been nothing about any cricket players getting arrested. So I don't think it's match fixing. They would arrest and then question. So there's been no police presence around the England setup, the West Indies, unless it's basically security around the ground. So on that one, I don't think it is. I think that while match fixing is rife in cricket, I don't think that's the case. I think it's more maybe an alcohol related incident. Something to do with the team code of conduct. And there's definitely something has happened with recently within a team environment, being for one of his teams that he plays for in professional cricket, um, um, where he plays on the IPL, PSL, T20 kind of circuit, or his county cricket team, or maybe even with the England setup. Like they're um, so. I think, but getting back to Eddie Jones, I think finding a replacement coach this close to a World Cup would be difficult with the amount of time they would have to change the playing style and the coaching setup. In regards to the fact that Jason Roy has decided to take an indefinite break, there is something going on. So we'll have to see what has caused the internally. It'd be nice to know what the ECB's code of conduct actually is and what leads to what various levels of suspension. I think that would be nice to know. But we need some more transparency from the ECB, not just on the Jason Roy situation. I just had some messages come in on my Instagram, so um, and so it's I think the lack of transparency from the ECB is the frustrating thing. Now, whether under his punishment he's not allowed to talk to the media, and that's another reason why he's taking his indefinite leave is another thing. Withdrawing from the IPL, I think we'll have to look. It would just be nice to know what the ECB's code of conduct is and what then leads to the various levels of disciplinary action, be it a fine, a suspended suspension, as in this case, an actual ban from playing for a lengthy period, what is actually what each offence constitutes. And so it's an interesting one. So I think the lack of transparency for me um, is what is frustrating. Um, and I understand that, like, yeah, he's pulled out the IPL. He's been internally disciplined by the ECB. I think that ban would also carry over to any other cricket competition, be it domestic or overseas, that he would play in at international level. Um, now, the ban itself is suspended for 12 months. Now, whether they backdated that as well to when this alleged offence happened, that is something else they haven't mentioned in their press release. So, therefore, it's frustrating the lack of transparency. But in the Mason, let's go to the Mason Greenwood situation. We know what's going on. We know he's been questioned by police. We know he's been indefinitely stood down by his club, even though the FA basically said he's not suspended. He can play. They left it up to the club's discretion with their own internal disciplinary proceedings. Um, I would have thought with the amount of players in various sports that if you are under a criminal investigation, you are indefinitely stood down until that doesn't matter if it's at international club level. If you are involved, if there's a criminal investigation, you should automatically be stood down, regardless if it's happened while you're on club duty or international duty. It should be irrelevant. We'll see. Um, yeah, it's interesting that he's still on bail and there's been no further real further developments. It's gone very, very quiet. Um, they will have to either extend his bail conditions. Um, they can release him under investigation, but not on bail. So he's now free to do his thing, but he will still be invest. There are various things they can do with the Mason Greenwood situation. They either have to charge, they have to extend, they have to apply to the court to extend bail. If they charge, they then have to assess if he's a flight risk, so remand or house arrest, or continue to be on sort of like a tag thing where you go in to a police. They have to report to a police station, maybe let's say once a week over a 30-day period. That's 4 times on a set day in the week. You have to report to a local police station. Um, if they drop it all, that is a smack in the face for domestic abuse survivors. Um, then a lot of pressure then goes on Man United with how they deal with him, considering he's had sponsors drop him, um, and and so he's lost sponsorships. I would say so. I would. It's a difficult one. Um, I was going to send a message to someone. Hang on 1 second. But yes, they would have that. It's going to put a lot of pressure on Man United what to do with him. Um, Hang on 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. In regards to the Man United situation, um, yeah, that puts a lot of pressure on them to reactivate him back to active status. Now, he hasn't played since his arrest. He has been barred from training or any participating in any club activities. Um, so the onus is now on Man United. A lot of his teammates have, I think, gone off him. The images and recordings that were circulating around social media were basically quite damning. Um, now, I don't know if Man United decide to terminate his contract, seeing him as too much of there'll be too much baggage with him to because he's going to face a lot of abuse when he re-enters the football field. He is going to be a target for opposition players, fans of not only his own club but opposition clubs. Um, it's a difficult one. Um, in other cases, it has gone to trial and they've been found guilty or innocent or retrial. So in in that regards, there could be more evidence come to light. They could rearrest. We just don't know. Um, the fact his bail has lasted so long, normally bail lasts a lot less time than this, says to me that they're gathering more evidence um, about his character. They're probably interviewing other people who've met him and worked with him. I wouldn't be surprised if some of his teammates have been interviewed as well about his character, especially some of these closer teammates that have come through the academy with him in the same age grades, schoolmate, that kind of thing, family, friends. That's generally how things go when it gets to you're on bail. You've been arrested, not questioned on a caution. That's different. If you're questioned on a caution, or you're giving a statement of your own um, uh, of your own free will, there are different layers because he has been. Um, it's a difficult one. So now, if they decide to terminate, we do. This is where the speculation over Jason Roy is a little bit dangerous as well. And again, that's why I don't like speculation. The the situation in regards to George Burgess in the NRL is he has been arrested and charged for again a similar offence, a sexual offence. Um, and the NRL's policy over player stand down. He's been named in the match day squad for this weekend, which I find surprising. The 24. So you only have to make your 18 out of that. But that happened quite quickly, out of the blue over the weekend. So he's in a lot of trouble. Jared Hayne's going to be facing a retrial over his legal misdeeds. Then you've got Gylfi Sigurdsson, who hasn't played all season, and there were allegations against him last summer. Hasn't played all season. He hasn't been charged with anything. He's been questioned under caution. Some of these investigations can take several months, even years, to compile all the evidence. So just because his bail is time is only got what how many other days or weeks left, um, is they can extend that. The fact there's been no further media reports and Ranick's facing no questions, the club ain't facing any questions. Um, we'll see what happens. In regards to the Clive Woodward, I don't read the Daily Mail. I'm afraid it's not my um, favourite one. Mendy, his trial date, because another charge has been added. I think that's in April sometime, because of the backlog of court cases. Benjamin Mendy, that hasn't gone quiet. We're just awaiting the confirmation of trial date because it has been pushed back because another offence was added. So he's facing 4 counts. Benjamin Mendy, that one hasn't gone quiet. He's still on remand, and I think his trial date is next month. It begins, or his pre-trial hearing is next month. In regards to the Brighton player, that went away. No further action was taken. Sigurdsson, yeah, that's gone quiet. He just hasn't played all season. Now, whether that's an internal within the club or he's decided to take a year's sabbatical, take some time out of nothing. But Benjamin Mendy, no, that one hasn't gone quiet. It's just the legal process has reached this point, and the pre-trial hearing is, I think, April, and then trial should begin shortly after. I think it's April 21st. Benjamin Mendy is his pre-trial hearing, where you have to name your name, address, date of birth, nationality, that kind of thing. How do you plead? Is plea hearing. Um, in regards to Clive Woodward's article, I don't read the Daily Mail if I can avoid it. Not a fan of that publication. Um, but the interesting thing is you've got a former England head coach um, criticising the current England head coach, who was his opposition head coach in the World Cup final, obviously in 2003. And yeah, that's an interesting one. The fact that we've had 2 salary cap breaches days apart, well, taking place at the same time, coming to light, you know, in the last couple of years, um, is quite troubling for me. Um, but at the same, I would say with the RFU, it's the same with the RFL. It's jobs for the boys. So it's very hard to get into these organisations as an outsider and gain influence from outside in. Same with the FA. This is a problem with our sporting administrators. It's a very closed. It's very difficult from someone who hasn't been involved to get into the administrative side of things at the top end when it comes to chairman and boards and things like that. And when you have that kind of nepotism, however good natured it may be, uh, it does lead to a decay within the organisation. And in regards to the fact the Leicester Tigers knew what they were doing in their salary cap breach. They knew what the threshold was before points deduction. They were very smart. They were smarter than Saracens. Let's just say that. Um, and they know down the line they can do it again. Um, in regards to Eddie Jones's position, it is a difficult one because Eddie Jones and Clive Woodward were opposition coaches in 2003 World Cup, and that was a very close game. And either side could have won that game. Let's make something very very clear. They were the 2 best sides in the world at that point, in my opinion. Um, France and the All Blacks were very close to them as well, and that is my general opinion on that one. At the time, those 4 teams, I think New Zealand peaked just before the World Cup, but those teams were really, a cut above the rest of the world at the time. Uh, it is interesting that not long after that, Sir Clive Woodward takes over at the Lions, and he had a disastrous Lions tour because he tried to coach the Lions the England way, and the other players in that Lions tour had been coached different ways and had different, styles of play that didn't work with, you know, his style of coaching and his style of play. Is there, yeah, I think Eddie Jones. I don't think he's a bad coach, but I think his selections and his tactics don't suit the best players that England has available or the players that are being selected, in my opinion. If you look at what they do at club level, they're all very different. I'm not saying Eddie Jones is a bad coach, but he is. He's chalk and cheese. When he was at Japan, he was brilliant. When he was assistant at South Africa play a very methodical, structured style. When he was at Australia, they were completely different to what South Africa were as he was an assistant in 2007. When he was at Japan, they played a completely different style to what is being employed here in the England setup. I wouldn't say he's done completely, but I think his time in the England job, for me, something has gone wrong. And that generally happens when a coach is there too long. Um, you sometimes need that fresh. There have been some assistant coaching changes in the backroom staff. When he took over to now, the coaching the coaches around him have changed as well. There have been changes to his assistants in his coaching team. So it's not the same coaching team that took over after Stuart Lancaster. There have been changes in the dressing room in that sense. And the game has evolved as well. There's been new rule changes, new rule variations, experimental rules as well. New rules brought in this season. So there have been changes, and the sport has evolved um, since 2016. There has been that kind of, but his relationship with the media is, again, it's mixed. I think it's like Wayne Pivac with Wales. He that one hasn't worked, in my opinion. Wales got lucky last year in the Six Nations with, I think, three of the matches they won. The teams were reduced to 14 players with yellow cards or red cards, and you had that man advantage for lengthy periods. But they finished fifth the two other seasons he's coached them, and his run up to last year's Six Nations, his win rate was the lowest out of the Six Nations coaches. So Wayne Pivac and Eddie Jones are the coaches, I think, right now under the most pressure. Wayne Pivac is obviously, for whatever reason, the Welsh Union keep going with Kiwi coaches, and I keep going with players with dubious connections to Wales by a grandmother or a grandfather or a cousin or residency. The French tried this for 15 years and they were really bad. So I don't understand the um, the logic behind that. And yes, you could argue the attack this year, and I will actually include the Italy game. That second half, England was shocking. Italy was showing, attempts to be expansive, and you could see the Italians were trying. The England side of things, they really were very passive. And yes, they win the game because they played good in patches and good enough to break down a very determined Italian defence. People go, oh, the Italians are crap. Actually, that Italian side really did make England have to labour for that win. And then you look what happened against Scotland. They were in a winning position, and Marcus Smith. If you take Marcus Smith out of that England side, they don't win a single game. And that is my honest opinion. You take Marcus Smith out of that England side, they don't even beat Italy. I don't think. That is how crucial Marcus Smith was to England in the 5 games he played in the Six Nations. You take Marcus Smith out of the England setup. I know we've got other young fly halves, and even other experienced fly halves that are still technically not retired, like a Toby Flood, for example. Oh, who would have thought? Who in emergency you could just call up for one test and go, look, we need to just get a win. We need to have some competency, some experience. And they went with Marcus Smith. Now, I know it's the same with Alan Wynne-Jones playing for Wales against Italy just to get into the cap milestone. I don't understand that. There's no room for sentiment anymore. You cannot have it. It's It's ridiculous. It hampers development, especially when like Alvin Jones hasn't played for months. He's still a brilliant block, in my opinion. Um, so um, it's the thing is, Youngs is still look. He's not had any major injuries. He trains hard. He's not the best scrum half we have available, no. And with the way that the rules have changed, and quick ruck speed being crucial, and unstructured play, as we saw with Italy and France, Scotland at times, like playing a bit unstructured at times. Ireland had a bit of a bit of the offload game increasing. Ben Youngs works when the opposition are poor defensively and you're winning the collision. England weren't winning the collision. Ben Youngs, you can slow the pace down a little bit if you win the collision, and England weren't winning the contact. So already the forward pack has put him on the back foot. Now I'm not saying yes, but you've got to win the collision. And against France, we weren't winning the collision. The French were winning the contact. If you put Ben Youngs on, you can win with Ben Youngs, but you've got to win the collision. You've got to win the right to go, okay, we want to have some structured play. So if you want to close out a game and you're winning by 20 points, you bring him on for 20 minutes. You don't start him. He's not a starter anymore. He is literally, okay, let's calm it down. We're ahead by 20 points or 15 points. Let's just strangle the life out of the opposition by really making them just have to. We win the collision, and then you just control the tempo. But it doesn't suit Marcus Smith's style of play. So that's the wrong combination to have. That's completely right. That's the wrong combination to have. I was watching the England France game, but there are ways where if you want to close out a game, yeah, Ben Young. If you want to win a game, you go with a different scrum half. I think it's because you've got an expansive fly half who plays unstructured, and you've got a structured scrum half. That's the problem. It's the chemistry between the two. I'm not saying you, it's a difficult one. For whatever reason, Eddie Jones wants to be up by 20 points and close out a game, and that's not been the case because we're not scoring tries. We're not winning the collision. So already the forward pack are being blunted. The outside backs, therefore, do not have the time and the space to create, and the creative axis has got an inexperienced international fly half. Now, Marcus Smith has actually played over 100 times for Harlequin, so he's not inexperienced. He's just inexperienced at test level, and that's the difference. Test level's even more brutal than club level. Now, the problem is Youngs is good off set play. So if your set play is working well, have him in the team. England's set play was not working as well as it should have. The rolling ball wasn't as great. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, Quirk and Randall and Smith, they are young, and you want to get them test experience. At the same time, you don't want them to like lose badly in games and have them a bit scarred up here. That's the problem. The issue is though, if you want to play, I this is where certain clubs have too much power at the RFU. Because I look at the England lineup and there are Bath players in there. I find that laughable that there are Bath players in there. Uh, um, if Youngs goes to the World Cup, we are going to struggle. I think I just have to send a message, but I keep getting emails and notifications on my various social media platforms, which is really annoying when you're doing a live stream. Um, I think the LRFU needs to be more transparent, and we need to know how selection policy works because I'm not saying Youngs is a bad player, but it doesn't. This England side some of the backs we have are very, very good ball runners, and they need space to get on the ball. And the forward pack, yes, there were players missing, and yes, there was a lot of new faces in there, some injuries, some retirements, but they weren't dominating. And when they were using um what's his name Ellis Genge in a rugby league sort of hit up, you know, Ellis Genge taking hit ups from depth. He was like in the fullback position, getting the ball there. I didn't get that. That's so easy to defend. That's so telegraphed. Give the ball to the big man. That was the most bizarre decision against France, using Ellis Genge as a rugby league style forward interchange. That's good. Bearing in mind, scrums in Union are different to league. That is a very tiring thing to do. So using Ellis Genge in that destructive ball running from depth, he's got to. You're making him run too much, and then he's got a scrummage. If you want to do that kind of play, do it 10, 15 metres out from the line, not from your own half. And I know Ellis Genge is exceptionally fit and mobile for a prop, but that for me they're misusing his ball carrying. You want Ellis Genge to be making those destructive runs from about 15 metres out at max, not from your own half, because they're so easy to telegraph. So easy to telegraph. And that French pack was dominant. And that's a Sean Edwards defence. That's a rugby league coach defence with Sean Edwards. That is a rugby league play that is so telegraphed. And that was a bizarre one to me from Eddie Jones using Ellis Genge in that kind of attacking platform. Made no sense. Made absolutely no sense. Honestly, that made no sense to me. Using Ellis Genge as a rugby league style front row or second row forward doing hit ups because a rugby union forward has a much more brutal job, I think, in play. Him running from deep against a rugby league coached defence. Remember that. Um, it is for me a bit of a bizarre one. And Sinclair constantly chewing gum. He's like, do you want to choke to death on the field? I mean, you need a bit of needle in your scrum, but I don't know. I don't know. And having Jamie George play for 80 minutes at hooker, um, that's a bit of a bizarre one as well. Um, but yeah, the international ranking: South Africa first, France second, the All Blacks dropped the third. I think that's a big shock. But Wales and England dropping as bad as they have, I'm not surprised. Um, I think there does need to be change. We need to look at selection, um, and and the start. The Ellis Genge one really got me. I'm a massive rugby league fan, as you know, but that was a rugby league style run that you take from the first kickoff or a kickoff, basically, where the half the back line the let's say the half back or the dummy half or the full back will pop the ball to the big front row forward, and you want to charge up and have a dominant first collision, and for me that is a bizarre tactic. Um, in in regards to the World Cup draw for the football, until the groups are actually fully announced, and then I can do a World Cup preview, and then break down who's in what group, the bracket, and who would and how and work out the path to the final for every team. Um, Germany though were very disappointing at the Euros and disappointing um, at the last World Cup. Germany are in a transition period. They've got a new coach. Players have retired. Big turnover of squad. Um, and that's a so until the World Cup groups are drawn, then we can do a World Cup preview. France and Ireland are France are I think slightly ahead of Ireland, and then there's a massive gap to the rest. There's a massive gap to the rest by some distance, in my opinion. Ireland scored more points than anyone else. So they had the most potent attack. Admittedly, there were two red cards in there that may have assisted them in that, but they had the most potent attack. Um, I'm trying to think who had the lowest penalty count. I think I'll have to look who had the lowest average penalty count as well, and that wasn't England. I'll tell you that. Could the France? Well, the last time they had the World Cup, they lost the opening match against Argentina, and then they lost the third, fourth place playoff against Argentina and the semi-final. So they weren't at their best. But in the following World Cup, an average French side gets to the final, but on the way losing to Tonga. So in the group stage. So, but this French side looks completely different than the French sides of like 14, 15 years ago, however long the World Cup was. It's a completely different setup. They've gone back to what made France France. Um, they're more expansive with their backs. Their offloading game is ridiculous. Their defence is ridiculous. Their fitness is ridiculous, and their discipline is massively improved. And their goal line defence is outstanding. They can take a lot of pressure, whereas 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, not the case. The thing is, though, they've got an inside centre who's an outside centre, an outside centre who's an inside centre, and a winger who's a centre or fullback. So their backline's a bit bizarre in how three of their players are actually playing in the wrong position. Just saying. You want Fiku at 12 and Dante at 13, but they work better the other way around in that combination. Otherwise, if you're looking at if Fiku's not playing, Dante plays at 13 and would be just as effective. So that's a really, you know, that's really interesting how that centre partnership works, where they're playing out of position. You should swap them around, but actually they work better in with Dante at 12 and Fiku at 13. When you would think Fiku would be the 12 and Dante would be the 13, or Fiku might be full back or on the wing because he can play anywhere. And Penaud, he's a centre as well, playing on the wing, and he could play him inside centre, outside centre, wing, left or right, or fullback. Penaud, he's a very talented player, very much like his father actually. And then Entermac can play fly half, inside centre and fullback. Dupont can play fly half as well. So their backline is so interchangeable. That's what's scary about their backline. Is you could move them all around and they would still be terrifying. Um, I it is one of them. Um, and but we'll see what happens. But no, Eddie Jones and Wayne Pivac for me are the coaches under the most pressure. Gregor Townsend, he's still got the highest win percentage of Scotland coach in the professional era. So I don't know what you do with Gregor Townsend and Scotland, because they're good one week and then poor the next. They're so frustrating to watch as a team, but their defence is massively improved and their attack is a little bit better. But that last game against Ireland, they were poor. Um, but every other game was really close and tight. It's frustrating watching Scotland because every game they play is tight apart from the Ireland game. Every game was a scrap. It was a fight. So they've got that fight and scrap about them, but they can't be consistent. They win one tight game, but they lose the other tight game. They win a tight game, they lose the tight game. Then they get blown out. That's the frustrating thing for me about Scotland is most of their games are really, really tight. The Ricketts bid for Chelsea, the fans. Well, I think the fans may not. The thing is, I think with the Ricketts bid, you might get more cost certainty. If the Ricketts get it, um, then look for them to reduce cost. Um, if the Candy bid gets it, the fan's still unhappy because he's not wealthy enough, which I find ridiculous because he's a local lad, supported the club all his life. He is based in London. He's a season ticket holder, which for me, if I was a Blackburn fan and another Jack Walker comes along, a local lad, local fan, local businessman, worth a bit of cash, but he's local. He's been a fan of the club since he was a boy. I'll be biting your arm off for that. Honest to God, if the Venkeys put Rovers up for sale and a local businessman from Lancashire, from the part of Lancashire we're talking about, proper bit of Lancashire, um, and a local businessman came along with a pot of cash going, this is my club, I want to buy my club. Bang. I think with the Ricketts, it won't be a leveraged takeover, though. It is their money. They are worth a stupid amount of cash. Unlike the Glazers, buy, they didn't buy the Chicago Cubs with other people's money. They bought it with their own money. So in that regard, they're not the Glazers. But again, American style ownership, I'm not a fan of it. Considering how the European Super League idea was American driven, they're going to want to cut costs of wage expenditure. I can see players getting sold. But you may see more youth coming to the Chelsea side. Um, they the Glazers do taint the record, but Gillette and Hicks when they were at Liverpool, they were fraudsters in the end. Randy Lerner, he bled Villa dry. The Fenway Sports Group, they've made some misjudgments since they've owned Liverpool. They've really made some misjudgments in the time they've owned Liverpool, and they've quickly backtracked on some of those ideas. The Glazers, however, now it's a difficult one because there's American money in the lower divisions as well. You don't want to scare off investment, but Lampard had no choice because they were under a transfer embargo. Which is what Chelsea are under now. Ironically, they've gone full circle. They get Lampard back in, it would promote even more youth players. In regards to the situation at Chelsea, I would hope the Candy bid makes it. Local lads, local businessman, fan for life. He's already a season ticket holder, so he already goes to games. He knows what it means, to the fan base to be a Chelsea fan. He stuck with them when the club were basically bankrupt, in the 80s and 90s. The Saudi bid, I think there was so much resistance to that, and question marks over it, that the negative publicity that would entail PR nightmare that would be, um, would say to me, that that's a big no go. Um, I wouldn't say every American owner is bad. I'm gonna put that out there. I will say that, but bearing in mind the Ricketts and Fenway Sports Group own Major League Baseball teams, they've just had a lockout, just ended, and you've got to look at the economics of that. They were trying to rip off their players, and even the deal they've got still rips off their player base, their employees basically, and some of the economics did go over my head a little bit. I'm not, but when your base salary for your lowest league salary you can give a player is still the lowest out of the four major leagues in the US, even with the improved deal. When the league above the third lowest league salary owns half as much as your league does, that tells you how greedy the owners are. And while the FSG, Fenway Sports Group, have brought success to the teams they now own, um, and they know how to win things with the teams they own, they voted. They were a big driving force behind Premiership Project Restart or Reset, which wanted to reduce the size of the league, and a few other bits and pieces, and that got rejected. Leicester were the club that really stuck the boot in, going, "We're not having that." And there were also big players with the European Super League idea. Um, and they, under the Fenway Sports Group, there's been protests over ticket prices at Anfield. There's been misjudgments in regards to the furlough scheme of furloughing staff. These guys could afford to pay. These guys could afford to pay their staff for a few months while the full lockdown this time last year. So from the 23rd, from this time last year, for the first 6 weeks, only essential services were working, which is me basically. Um, so nothing was happening sports wise. Okay, the players are in lockdown, the non-playing staff are in lockdown. They were trying to argue, cap in hand, we're going to use the furlough scheme. We're going to furlough our non-playing staff. So the club shop, the club administrators, club offices, and that went down really, really badly because the owners are worth a stupid amount of cash, stupid amount of cash, and yeah, it just was ridiculous. They got hammered in the press for that. Same with Tottenham; they got absolutely hammered. And in Tottenham's case, their owner's a tax exile. He's British, but he's not registered here, and that went down badly as well. Yeah, yeah, the old Gillette and Hicks and all that. Um, they were terrible owners. There is no doubt they were terrible owners, and what we now know about Gillette and Hicks and some of their criminal activities, it's kind of a good thing that they're no longer involved in club football. Um, oh, I love motorbikes. There's a motorbike meet that takes place up the road from me, so all the bikers are flying about very loudly. Yeah, there are question marks over club ownership, and Simon Jordan on Talksport did sum it up perfectly in regards to Abramovich and the Saudi and Dubai money in the game, and I think he was also taking a dig at some of the American owners as well, um, and some of the other owners are a bit dodgy. Not just, I think it was more than just a Premier League run, and he is right. Oh yeah, that would be a 750 or a 650 blasting down the main road. Um, and that's with my window slightly open, and I'm about 50 meters from the main road. So yeah, you can imagine how loud it gets on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays when the bike meets are on. Um, yeah, I have to admit the American style. I've had this discussion, and I know I've got American subscribers and American viewers, and I've had this discussion about how their sports culture is different to ours with the franchise model over the promotion relegation club model, and and how they have a draft system and we have a youth development system, with the club is hands on the whole way through, from early years all the way up to senior level, and more community based. Um, I want the county guy to take over. It's like a Blackburn story back in the late 80s, early 90s with Jack Walker, local businessman, um, boyhood fan of the club all the way through his entire life, season ticket holder, comes in and saves the club from a financial mess it was in, and made the club a winner. Um, I hope Nick Candy, and Holly Valance, because that's his wife. Remember Neighbours? Yeah. I hope his bid is the one that is accepted. Simply because, yeah, it's a local businessman, and he's willing to put his entire fortune into this club. He's willing to risk his reputation on this club. Um, and for me, that speaks volumes. I don't, okay, he's in property development, and that's a bit of a touchy subject with a lot of people with issues with rental prices and property prices. But he's still a local businessman. And as I say, he's got strong links to the club. He's a fan of the club. This is not just like some businessman going, "I want this as an investment." This is a guy who's invested in the club, spends his money going to games. Um, is a proper fan of the football club, and I think that if I was a Chelsea fan, that's the takeover I would want. He's British. He's a fan of the club anyway, and he's stuck. He's been a fan of the club when the club were crap and bankrupt, and he's been going to games for 46 years. 46 years he's been going to Chelsea games. So for me, that would be the guy I want to take over. And I'm not a Chelsea fan either, but I have friends and who are, and I've got subscribers who are, and that for me would be my preferred choice. Even as a neutral, that's my preferred choice. It's like a Blackburn story all over again. Local businessman, boyhood fan of the club, wants to see his local club and his local community thrive. And in that respect, that's why I want him to be the preferred bidder. Um, and I think that could be said for a lot of football clubs. You would rather have the club owned locally than from overseas by some billionaire or millionaire or trillionaire if the Saudis take over, who sees it as an investment for their portfolio of businesses. Yeah, look, they didn't care where the money was coming from, so long as the money came in. And but you look at some foreign owners, like at Leicester, for example, you couldn't ask for better ownership at Leicester. Um, you look at, I'm trying to think of some clubs that are well respected and well. Look at Exeter City. The fans are on the board. And I know it's not a Premier League club, and I know people go, Exeter City. They're the best run club in the country. Every other club, when they do the yearly auditing, and the auditors kind of, they go, they're the best run club. They actually run on a profit. For League Two, running on a profit is really hard to do. They're making money. They're able to redevelop their stadium with their own money. They're not having to use any loans, um, because the fans have a say where the money is spent, um, and there is fan involvement. Um, I think Brighton's a well-run club. I think there's there are. I think Palace. They're British owned. I think they're well run now. They were actually struggling financially 12 years ago, but they're a well run club now. Um, I think Brentford are a well run club, and then there's some other clubs that aren't so well run. And I would say Tottenham. Look at the expenditure wasted at Tottenham. The vanity behind that new stadium for what? For what? Another trophy this season? They can't even fill the bloody thing, and it saddled the club with a lot of debt, and that is the elephant in the room with Tottenham. Is they hampered their squad and team development for a stadium they can't even fill. And they still have not got sponsorship naming rights for it either. Um, yes, Seb Coe, and he's been a sports administrator for a long time. Has Sebastian Coe? He's been involved in sports administration and sports governance, so he knows all about the administrative side of things. He was part of the organising committee for the Olympics. He's been a member of Parliament. He's been a gold medalist at the Olympics. Um, one of the most decorated distance runners this country's ever had. Um, and he's been on the board of UK Athletics. He's worked with the IOC, the IIAF. He's a sports guy. He may not be a football guy necessarily, but he's been involved in organising Olympic Games, World Championships. He sits on multiple sports boards. He's been involved with sports funding, a whole range of issues. He's been a member of Parliament, as I say. He sat on the Sports and Media Select Committee when he was a member of Parliament. Um, and while that bid's worth, I think, slightly less than Candy's bid, because you've got that political and administrative experience on the sports side of things. I think Seb Coe was a junior minister for sport as well. Um, for me, that is a good bet as well. I'm not sure how well Seb Coe will go down with the Chelsea fan base, because he's a bit of a nerdy white guy. He really is a bit nerdy, but he's a very intelligent man. He's very well respected in sports circles, and so we'll see. We will see. And of course, he's a very well-known figure in sport. He's very well known, and he's a very competent sports administrator. I wouldn't say he's the best, although he has faced some backlash over the dealing of the Russian doping scandal. And that is the issue. When he was in the IIAF and the Olympic Committee and all that kind of thing, and working in those bodies, that he did face a bit of backlash after the Sochi doping scandal all came out, and how the athletics and the Olympic committees dealt with banning Russia, but not the Russian athletes. Um, but two British bids on the table, and one of them is from a sports administrator. And I think that's what could get that Lord Coe and Broughton's bid over the line is Seb Coe as Lord Coe has been involved in sports administration and organising committees for sports for the Olympics. He was a big thing about the Olympic. He was involved in the Olympic bid. He was involved in the organisation, the organising committee. He sat on at various high levels in the International Athletics Federation, the IOC. So if you want to have a competently run club, Seb Coe is your man. If you want to have a passionately run club, Nick Candy's your man. If the Ricketts come in, they're going to try and run it like Fenway Sports Group or the Glazers, and you could get a mixed bag with them and a mixed reception. And the fans aren't overly happy with being linked. You've got to win the fans over. You have to win the fans over. I'm not saying every Chelsea fan is a fan of Abramovich, because the amount of sackings of managers has pissed off some Chelsea fans. They need that managerial stability, like a Ferguson or a Wenger, and they haven't had that. So some Chelsea fans have been a little bit disgruntled. I wouldn't say they want, say, Abramovich out, but they've been a bit frustrated with the constant managerial sackings under Abramovich. That's the problem. I think with Chelsea is the lack of keeping a manager in for a long period of time and backing you when they're having a down season. And Candy did up his bid as well. Extra finance came in. Um, it's a two-horse race between those two, in my opinion, for public opinion. Out of those two, you want one of those two bids to win. I know Candy's a lot of Chelsea fans' favourite, but if you want to have your club really well run and with controlled expenditure without being American style about it, and very, very well run, if not lacking a little bit of passion, but it's going to be well run, it's going to be well organised, and thoroughly thought through, you want Lord Coe. You want to have a bit of passion added to that, and you know, passion and not expectation, but a bit of extra investment, you want Nick Candy. Um, and if you're a Chelsea fan, he's a Chelsea fan. Now, Seb Coe, I think, is the logical choice if you want to have a logical argument. But the passion, the heart over logic says Candy. Um, I think so. You've got two solid bids there. You've got the emotional bid with Nick Candy, but he's also a local businessman who has made a lot of money and been very, very successful in what he does. And as a property developer, you have to follow regulations a lot as well. And he's a fan of the club. And then you've got Lord Cohen and Sir Martin Broughton, who come from a sports administration background, and you know, and Seb Coe was an athlete. He has been on the playing field. I know it's athletics, but he has competed at a high level. He's a decorated Olympian, and so he knows what it's like to train for your event. You know, perform on the biggest stage, and then he's gone from sports into politics into sports administration. So he's a very experienced hand at the wheel, and they're the two strong bids. I know what the fans would like to see out of those two, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what the final shortlist of three is, and then the, the company in charge of the sale, they've got to go right. We've got three public bids on the table. The rest have been cut from the shortlist, and they want to get the sale completed. The quickest sale they've ever done of a football club was 10 days. 10 days. We may see this deal done before the end of March or before Easter. We could see this sale done before Easter. That is the time. But bearing in mind, we've only got 9 weeks until the special operations license. They do, but there's 9 weeks to get this over the line before administration. Now, if the deal gets over the line after the 31st, administration rules kick in. Now, that creates a whole other headache, and it could take a long time. But I would have thought Lord Coe or Candy, because Nick Candy's a developed a lot of property in London, so you've got to be able to liaise with politicians basically to get your planning permission. Lord Coe sits in the Houses of Parliament, so those two, I think, bids would be easier. I don't know if they're ruled out or not. I don't know if they're ruled out or not, but I think the due diligence, and I think also I think the, the, the fan response will have a lot to do with who actually ends up buying the club. I honestly believe that. I think the fan feedback, which will be noted, will have a big outcome on who buys the club. And I know my two bids that I want to see as the final two. Yes, there were some rather distasteful allegations a few years back before COVID. Another dark stain on Major League Baseball. Oh, a sport that just keeps giving. A league just keeps giving. And with everything, and Chelsea has a bad reputation within its fan base for that kind of um, antics, with some of their fan base being less than decent, um, and bring yeah, and there's been footage circulating of Chelsea fans in Europe this season, and I think it was against Lille, um, smashing up a guy's bar, and then battles with the riot police in central Lille. That that's been circulating. So they're not Chelsea is a club people love to hate. There's a few clubs that have a very negative reputation, um, and Chelsea is definitely one of them. And it is a minority of their fans misbehaving. I call them fans, don't I? Those associated with the club, who wear the club colours but really bring the club down. And there's a handful of clubs in England and Scotland who have a poor reputation domestically and overseas. There are other clubs in Europe that have also got a poor reputation at home and overseas for fan misbehaviour. I use that loosely because they're just wolves in sheep's clothing, really. They're just thugs. Um, and unfortunately, Chelsea, unfortunately, is a club a lot of neutrals love to hate. And a lot of people are rubbing their hands with glee at Chelsea's situation. But it could happen to your club. It could happen to any of our clubs that we support. In not just football, but any sport. It could happen to any team we follow could be in this situation. Whether it's through government sanctions or going to administration, facing the threat of liquidation. I've been there as a ice hockey fan. I've been there as a football fan. It when the future of your team is uncertain. I've been there and I've fundraised and I've you know been through the mill. Notice what I'm wearing. And it doesn't matter what level on the sporting professionalism you're on. I've been there and I've seen how that actually affect how a community can rally together. Um, and yeah, it is one of them. It is not pleasant, and but we'll see how this plays out. If Nick Candy does get the reins, that'll be perfect for an emotional side of things, the passionate side of things, would be those who want to, the romance side of things. But I'll be equally as happy if Lord Cohen and Broughton, Sir Martin Broughton's bid wins, because then it's going to be competent, decent ownership who already have a sports administration background. So the club will be in safe hands, well run, um, and more transparent in their dealings. So it's heart over head, head over heart. It's common sense going with passion. Imagine if those two bids were like, how about we come together? Imagine that if Nick Candy goes to Seb Coe, should we just combine our bids together? Um, oh god, I wouldn't want to see Burnley go out of business. I really wouldn't. I love to hate Burnley, but I wouldn't want to see Burnley or Accrington Stanley go out of business. I really wouldn't. Our two local rivals in geographical location, even though we're in three different leagues, Premiership, Championship, and League One. I would not like to see Accrington or Burnley go. Burnley especially, because that rivalry sells, puts bums on. Well, bums come off seats and seats come out of stands, but damage is done. But the, his, the original Accrington, Burnley, and Blackburn are three founders of the Football League. If you lose foundation clubs, and Accrington Stanley is the third iteration of Accrington, by the way, so we actually have lost a foundation club there. That's part of the history of the sport. It's the reason why the sport is what it is. Of those three towns in Lancashire and Aston Villa, without the two Sheffield clubs, and Sheffield Wednesday have almost gone bust multiple times in the last 20 years. Like, I wouldn't want to see Preston North End go under. Other local rivals we've got in Lancashire, they're in central Lancashire, but still, to get to Ewood Park, I have to go to Preston to then get to Blackburn. It's weird to get a train. I honestly wouldn't. And when Villa went into administration, I did a video. There was some dickhead who was like, couldn't have. I really was just like, mate, on your big match days, when Aston Villa aren't there, your atmosphere is going to be flat. You're going to lose so much revenue. Same with Birmingham City. While we might have a dislike for certain clubs, you want to see them keep going because you like that rivalry, you like that needle. You thrive with it. And I wouldn't want to see a single. I mean, our historical rivalries are actually, ironically, more than Man United. It's more Liverpool, ironically. The Lancashire thing. Uh, Liverpool and Everton, um, games against them actually had more rest than games against teams from Greater Manchester. Weird that. Um, but I wouldn't want to see Burnley or Accrington Stanley go under. I really wouldn't. Um, because one day Accrington might make it to the Championship. We might still be in the Championship. We might fail to get promoted. Burnley get relegated. Accrington get promoted. Imagine all three Lancashire clubs. That'd be brilliant. I don't think it happened, but no, that raises your game raises for those games. The atmosphere raises for those games. And looking at Barcelona's situation, imagine if Espanyol was the wealthy club in Barcelona, that'd be ridiculous. They pretty much are, so they've got no debt. But I think Barcelona fans wouldn't want to see Espanyol go out of business or end up in the situation they are because while El Clasico is it's the biggest for them, their local derby is equally as fierce. And it's the same with Atletico and Real Madrid. Um, Bilbao and Racing Santander, they hate each other. Because Racing Santander is pro royalty, and Atletico Bilbao is the independence movement in the Basque Country. Honest to God, it's like Torino and Juventus, uh, Sampdoria and Genova, um, Palermo and Catania. But although Palermo is really fucked at the moment, um, the little derbies in Italy are really missed. Like you just it's like Bari versus Lazio is a massive derby in Italian football in the south, especially, and they're in different leagues. Um, Inter and AC, Lazio and Roma. It, you just don't want to see it happen. Um, Hamburg and Bremen, Dortmund and Leverkusen. They may not be the biggest derbies per se in their particular league, because Dortmund Bayern Munich's the biggest match in German football. But imagine if Bayer Leverkusen or Borussia Dortmund went tits up, and they have done in the past, and were really in administration, docks points. You lose something. You lose something. And how German fans across Germany club together to keep Dynamo Dresden going, even if they're in a different league, speaks volumes. Yeah, whether we get promoted from the Championship or not, and if Burnley survive in the Premier League or not, I'd rather see Burnley get relegated and us get promoted than Burnley or us go out of business. I'd rather see Accrington be financially stable and we get them in a cup tie than see them go out of business. Like, it when Bury went tits up and when Macclesfield went tits up, football lost something. Yeah, you do. I want to see Tranmere try and make a push for the Premier League at some point because that would be interesting. Imagine if Tranmere played Everton in a league game. Jesus Christ! Because Everton looking like to get rid of Tranmere could, it. It's like Sunderland and Newcastle. You've lost something because Sunderland are in two leagues below. You've lost something in the northeast. When Rangers went down to the bottom tier of Scottish football, you lost something, and Scottish football suffered as a result. Um, when Hearts and Hibs aren't in the same division, you lose something. So for me, yeah, local rivalries doesn't matter if your team's doing well in the league or not. You need them. And quite honestly, unfortunately, with what's been going on, the way some clubs have been so badly run, and the way the directors' test is so weak, Uh, Sunderland, they've been so mismanaged though. They've been shockingly mismanaged for 15, 20 years. Newcastle the same. Shocking ownership. Regardless of, you know, the colours they wear, the Tyne-Wear derby is one of the fiercest rivalries in English football. And I would love to have seen Tranmere make the Premier League, because imagine that. Birkenhead versus Liverpool. So the Wirral, the other side, the south side of the Mersey going north of the river. That would be amazing. Absolutely amazing. Can you imagine Prenton Park? It'd be shaking like bits of the stadium would be falling apart with the anticipation of playing Everton or Liverpool. And when they went out of the Football League, yeah, shouldn't have happened. But again, poor ownership, poor decisions, poor club structures. They're back in the Football League now, which is a good thing. But yeah, well, that shows how poor Sunderland's squad management and decisions have been. I've got a soft spot for Tranmere. I do. I do have a soft spot for Tranmere. Um, uh, you want to see some clubs make it to the big time, like Brentford. I've got a soft spot for Brentford as well. I've got my mate's a Brentford fan. She takes her kids to games. Their dad's a Brentford fan as well. They love going. They used to go to the old stadium. They're going to the new stadium. They love the experience. Obviously, I've got friends who are Aldershot fans, and that's just how Aldershot. My dad had a trial for them as well. Um, when he was deciding his army future after his initial enlistment, and then my sister was born. So, and at the time, you earn more money as a squaddie than a football player. So, my dad could have, if my sister hadn't been born when she was, we would have been brought up in a football household, quite literally. Um, and my dad was weighing up his army options. He'd been in the army, I think, 4 or 5 years at this point, maybe 6 years, and he was coming to the end of his minimum enlistment term. And my sister came along, and my dad made a decision to stay in the army. How things could have been different if my sister was a little bit younger, just a couple of years younger, or if I was the firstborn, for example. My dad would have been a professional football player. That's how weird it is. Um, and that's where I get my love for sport from, is from my dad, to be fair. But that's how fine margins, when especially then, um, you could earn more money working in as a tarmacker on the roads, or as a squaddie, or as a builder or a carpenter, uh, than a professional player in the old days. Not the case now, but before the Premier League era. And a lot of good players, young, talented players, dropped out of the game because of lack of money. Um, and well, we've now retained a lot of that talent because of the increased wages that players get now. Um, a lot of talent was lost in the 70s and the 80s when there wasn't a lot of money in the sport, in the lower divisions, or even in the top division as well for some clubs. And a lot of good, young, promising players gave up the game completely, and left the sport completely. You know, and there you go. And yeah, clubs went out of business all the time. True, but they were earning decent money. You could live comfortably. back in the night on the money that the old Division One were paying. You could have a decent life, and you could buy a house outright and things like that. And it's not the case now in the Championship. There's some stupid wages in the Championship, as well as the Premier League. But yeah, you could eventually make a decent living in the 90s. It's the 2000s where wages have exploded. But in the 90s, yeah, you could have a decent living and own your own home by the age of 23, 24. And the thing is, the you know the wife or the girlfriend could still actually have a normal job, and the kids could have a normal life, and you weren't always in the media, weren't always in your face. And that's not the case now. And I wouldn't say League Two salary. I would say more like League One. Some League Two salaries. Some of the clubs there are on. Some of the players are not on a lot of money a week. Um, but yeah, you could with the cost of living and what you could earn a good solid salary, like 80 grand a year, and that is acceptable. I think. Um, Not 80 grand a week, but yeah, a football player in the 90s playing professionally, the old Division One, Division Two, Division Three. Yeah, if your club was well run, which a lot of them actually were in the early 90s when the money started shooting into the game, um, those players, a lot of them did do quite well. And when they retired, a lot of them invested quite. A lot of them, trained up and had other skills because when they were apprentices, they had to actually learn a skill, which I think players now, when they're in the academies, they don't learn to, you know, business administration or a trade. So when they do retire, they go to rack and ruin. They don't live in the real world. Well, where back in the 80s and 90s, you had the apprenticeships, football apprenticeships, where not only did you have to train and play, youth level or reserves, you also had a skill. You learned a skill, proper working class game, working middle class game. Not the case now. Mike Dean, yeah, Mike Dean. He's been a referee for a long time. I think his quality of refereeing has declined in recent seasons. I think age has caught up with him a little bit. The change in the game has caught up with him a little bit. He hasn't adapted well to the VAR. He's an old school ref. Um, it is a shame that he's decided to call it a day, but he's obviously worked out. That's obviously time to wind it down. Hopefully, I hope. Let's say. I hope. Well, maybe he should referee the FA Cup or the playoff final. That'd be. I think the Championship playoff final, the FA Cup final, would be a perfect send off for Mike Dean. I think. Um, Euro 2028. The other bids dropped out. That's it. The other bids dropped out. So we've been giving it for nothing, which is brilliant. Um, the English game on Netflix. I hope it's still on there. I think it might still be on there. The history of football in the FA Cup. I watched the documentary about Nottingham Forest. That was brilliant. And of course, they used to have to use historical footage of Clough and all that. But the players they interviewed and that was a brilliant documentary. Brilliant. Can't recommend it enough. Can't remember the name of it, but I watched the Nottingham Forest documentary. That was brilliant. And how old is Mike? I don't know. Mike Dean has got to be in his 50s. He's a senior ref, so he's quite old. I think he's in his 50s. But the pace of the game's caught up with him. The pace of the game's much faster than when he started, and I think he's quite right to go. No, I've refereed long enough. Yeah, that young Man City academy player who took his own life after an injury, and Man City failed to support him. Coming off that, yeah, a lot of them they get thrown in the scrap heap. That's the problem. That is a problem. Some of them end up in the non-league or the lower leagues. They get picked up on, um, trial and pay as you play and trade and trial contracts, trial and train and all that. And that's what happened to Ricky Lambert. It happened to Jamie Vardy. It happened to a lot of Grant Holt. Um, there were. I think Ricky Lambert is the prime example. He was let go by Liverpool at 15, told he would never make it. Was working in a factory and as a semi-pro player in the non-league, and he ended up playing in the football league and going on to be an England national. And you could say is Ricky Lambert a feel-good story? Yes, it is. I think with Ricky Lambert, you could argue it is. Grant Holt, absolutely exactly the same. Jamie Vardy, I think the best of the three. Ian Wright was a non-league player, came to professional football in his mid-20s, um, and I think Dublin's the Aviva's got games. It's the UK and an Ireland, so it'll be Dublin. It'll be south of the border that gets games. Um, if anything, and the FAI, sorry, the Football Association of Ireland is in desperate need of cash. So to joint host, really, that's a big thing for Irish football. I don't know how it's all. The Aviva's a massive stadium. Croke Park as well. You could host games at Croke Park. Um, they've got two world class stadiums in Dublin that are fantastic facilities. Um, I think there's going to be games in Scotland and Wales as well. I think they're going to split the groups around the UK and Ireland. Um, for me, that is a big thing that we've just got it by accident. We didn't have to pump loads of money into an expensive bid because the other interested parties dropped out. And the FAI are basically bankrupt. They need the money. They need that. What stadiums? I would say the Aviva or Croke Park. Most likely the Aviva, and possibly Croke Park for a couple of games as well, because that's two stadiums, so you can sort of play two games in Dublin on the same day, for example. Wembley, obviously. Old Trafford would be in there. I would think St James's Park in Newcastle, Anfield in Liverpool, the Etihad in Manchester, the London Stadium for West Ham, the Amex in Brighton, because that's hosted internationals as well, in major tournaments, not necessarily football, but the Amex. Um, some of the more regional states, maybe St Mary's. It's a difficult one because you've got so many world class stadiums in this country, in the UK and Ireland. There's so many. Um, so we'll have to see what happens. But there's so many world class facilities that we have in this country that can host games. So I think the Stadium MK is part of the reason to have that was for the failed World Cup bid, which Qatar got. Um, and there's room and space within the stadium to extend the seating capacity without having to expand the stadium. You can double the seating capacity in Milton Keynes, and that is a fantastic facility. Um, so that stadium was built for a World Cup bid that failed. So Milton Keynes will probably get a game or two. Hampden Park, obviously. Uh, maybe maybe Swansea or Cardiff, the Liberty or what's Cardiff's new stadium called? Leicester might King Power might get a game. There are I could just list off every Premier League and Championship stadium at this point because there's so many quality facilities that we have that meet UEFA standard for Champions League football. Molineux could get a game because that's now up to scratch. Vicarage Road could get a game. the Emirates, White Hart Lane, any club in London, any stadium in London. I mean, you could in theory host the whole. In theory, there's enough stadiums in London to host the tournament alone. But we'll have to see what happens. We'll have to see what when we get closer, what the venues are going to be. We know certain stadiums are going to have more work done. I know Anfield's going to have work done. There's a further the away end at Anfield is going to be increased capacity. But there are so many stadiums that have hosted international games in England. Take your pick. Take your pick. We are awash with stadiums that have hosted England internationals when Wembley was being rebuilt. Take your pick. It is an honest take your pick at this point. And it all depends on, because Old Trafford there's plans to redevelop, or to redevelop, but refurbish and work on Old Trafford. There's plans for Anfield. Everton have got plans for their new stadium, whether they go ahead or not because of various issues with the planning, ownership and planning and all that. You've obviously got the Emirates at Arsenal, White Hart Lane, Wembley itself. Well, it'll be interesting to see what stadiums are chosen. But anyway, I'm going to call that a stream. We've ended on talking about the Euros, which is nice. Bit different a stream this one with the Jason Roy situation with the ECB. There being a very very closed shop about that. That is a bit of a concern for me. The lack of transparency there, as I say. And so yeah. Will the finals be held at Wembley? Most likely. Most likely. But again, we're what, 6 years away? I wouldn't be surprised if Wembley hosts the final, but we'll see what happens. Obviously, the security's got to be a hell of a lot better than what it was last summer, because that was shambolic. But yeah, there we go. Thank you very much for watching. I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon. So goodbye for now. I've got to get an early night. I've obviously got work in the morning, so I'll see you guys all later. I've got some holiday booked for 3 days next week, so there'll probably be more video content going up on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week, because I've got 3 days of work. But I have got a very busy weekend next weekend, so there might be a bit less content going up next weekend. I've got some friends coming over to visit, and I'm socialising with some people. So I will do a channel update video over next week, because there's going to be some schedule changes. We may not have some live streams for a few days. We may have 3 days solid content, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I might not be doing any videos, simply because I'm seeing some friends and all that, and keeping busy. And I've got lots of paperwork to sort out, bills to pay, etc. So I may be a bit quiet over next weekend, but there's some other bits and pieces. We've got the final round of NRLW fixtures before final series this weekend. That's been a brilliant competition so far, and of course I've got the NRL games as well. So there's a fair bit to keep you busy, and we'll see what happens. And we'll keep a close eye on the Chelsea situation, because the process may start getting very very. Now they've narrowed it down to a short list of bids, and the preferred bids would be interesting. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more videos for you very very soon.